This video is sponsored by Ground News. They do everything to keep him happy.
The Honorable Donald Trump, President of the United States of America.
One after another. Here's Starmer from the UK.
It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented.
Merz from Germany.
We owe the Americans a lot, and so with your German provenance, I think this is a very good basis for close cooperation between America and Germany.
Meloni from Italy.
We support your efforts, Donald. Thank you.
Trump has started a trade war. He's been super lenient on Putin, bombed Iran, and still refuses to fully endorse NATO's Article 5.
It depends on your definition.
But everyone remains charming. More than that.
Daddy has to sometimes use strong language against us.
Strong language. Everyone's saying, yeah.
Mark Rutte, he called you daddy.
Yeah, I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay?
Clearly something is not working, so maybe it's time to stop the ass kissing and grow a spine and step up to Trump. As Europeans, we've grown pretty used to watching our leaders do the pilgrimage to Trump's White House for some serious ass kissing. But the NATO summit over the past few days, that was something else entirely. For example, this message here. It was sent by Mark Rutte, the former Dutch Prime Minister and now the head of NATO, to Trump, before he even arrived at the summit. And just listen to this language. Donald, you have driven us to a really important moment for America and Europe and the world, he wrote. You will achieve something no American president in decades could get done. And then this. Europe is going to pay in a big way, as they should, and this will be your win. I mean, I just can't listen to this anymore. It's embarrassing, and it begs the question, is this really necessary? We're honestly not so sure, and neither are a lot of media sources. There are many opinions and many agendas when it comes to whether European leaders should keep appeasing Trump. And there are more than 70 sources covering this story that you can read online. But how can you tell what you're reading isn't just hugely biased? Honestly, that's a challenge I continuously face in my everyday life. And that's exactly where this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. For this story alone, Ground News identified at least 10 left-leaning and 15 right-leaning sources reporting on it. You could go and reach each one further below, but one of Ground News' best features is their bias comparison tool. For example, left-leaning outlets were more skeptical, saying NATO Chief Mark Rutte's message was overly flattering, too excessive, and simply unhelpful. While right-leaning outlets took a more positive view, crediting Rutte, and especially Trump, for pushing NATO spending from 2% to 5%. And there's so much more. The Ground News app and website come with a whole range of smart features. You get a visual overview of each story's political bias, factual accuracy, and even who owns the outlet, all rated by 3 independent news monitoring organizations. If you'd like to give it a try, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen right now. Back to the video. To me, it feels like European leaders are taking exactly the wrong approach. Right now, the mindset seems to be, what do we need to do to keep the US security guarantee? And so we bend over backwards, because the argument goes, without the US, NATO simply does not work. But honestly, hasn't the US already stepped back anyway, or at least weakened the alliance significantly? Just days ago, Trump was asked whether he'd enforce Article 5 if a NATO member were invaded. His response?
Depends on your definition. There's numerous definitions of Article 5, you know that, right? But I'm committed to being their friends. You know, I've become friends with many of those leaders, and I'm committed to helping them.
And this is the core problem. NATO deterrence only works if it's believable. Would the US really defend Germany with nukes or Estonia? It doesn't really matter, as long as Russia or any other adversary believes that they would. And statements like that from Trump put a massive question mark over it. So yeah, Trump wouldn't even need to formally leave NATO for the alliance to stop working. And yet most European leaders, still hell-bent on keeping the arguably already lost US security guarantee, have agreed to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP. And you know what? This probably benefits the US more than anyone. European countries will end up buying most of the gear from American defense companies individually. NATO countries will likely compete against each other, driving up prices. And we'll see even more duplication of capabilities. Everyone building their own tank, own planes, own defense systems. Right now, EU countries operate 12 different types of tanks. That's such a nightmare for interoperability, logistics, and maintenance. And worst of all, this approach just deepens our dependence on the US. The exact thing we should be trying to get away from. So instead of obsessing over how to keep the US security guarantee, our mindset should be, how do we build our own European security guarantee? We need to finally accept that the American deterrence is likely over and start taking things in our own hands. If we want a truly independent European defense, we need to address 5 key defense gaps where the US currently dominates. The first gap is US military presence in Europe. The US has around 100,000 troops stationed across the continent. Most are in Germany, with smaller but significant numbers in Italy, the UK, Poland, and Spain. The idea is super simple. If Russia attacks, these 100,000 troops are the first line of defense, and they'd be reinforced fast by up to 200,000 more US troops, mainly heavy armor designed for Eastern European combat. That's a massive deterrent force. The second gap is US defense spending, manpower, and equipment. Right now, the US accounts for over 70% of NATO defense spending, around $916 billion. That's more than all other allies combined. NATO has about 3.4 million active troops. And without the US's 1.3 million, that drops to 2.1 million. Still big, but suddenly very fragmented. Without the US, NATO also loses 40% of its tanks, 42% of its fighter jets, and 26% of its naval fleet. But it's not just about quantity. The US Navy's 300 ships add up to 4.5 million tons in displacement. NATO's total is about 5.7 million tons. So without the US, 79% of NATO's naval power is gone. That's not a gap, it's a crater. The third gap is US leadership. The American military operates a single integrated force, a unified command, fast decision-making, and standardized communications in one language. And this leadership goes far beyond their own forces. It shapes how other armies operate too. As one high-ranking French military officer put it, the advantage of American leadership is that it is so superior, massive, and benevolent that no one can dispute it. It brings order to the playground. The fourth gap is American tech. The US has world-leading defense technology, satellites, GPS, cyber capabilities, surveillance, and so on. It also runs the NSA and the CIA and shares that intelligence across NATO. In fact, roughly 80% of NATO's surveillance and intelligence comes from the US alone. So Europe has so much catching up to do here. And finally, probably the most important gap, nukes. The US has over 5,000 nuclear weapons, delivered through a full triad: land-based missiles, submarines, and aircraft. Russia has a similar number, about 5,600, also with a triad. That's a serious deterrent. Now compare that to Europe. The UK and France combined have just around 515 nuclear warheads. The UK relies entirely on American-made Trident missiles, launched from submarines. France has a bit more flexibility, delivering nukes by air, via Rafale jets and sea. But without the US, Europe has no nuclear umbrella that's even close to credible against Russia. So, these are the core areas that Europe should be looking at when asking, how do we build our own European security guarantee? Of course, none of this can be fixed overnight, but in the long term, it would be far more effective than simply hoping that USA will play nice. And to be honest, the best vision for the future might actually come from Pedro Sanchez in Spain, who said earlier this year, "It is time to create a European army, EU armed forces with troops from all 27 member countries, working under a single flag with the same objectives. This is the only way we can become a true union and guarantee lasting peace in Europe. And honestly, we think he's right. This would be the most effective way to address the problems we've just laid out. And to be clear, a European army wouldn't need to replace national armies. It would be an addition, a complement of around 300,000 troops, exactly enough to replace the US contingent in Europe. Participating countries would fund it and allow EU to recruit soldiers directly from their populations. For example, if the new NATO target is 5% of GDP in defense spending, then 1% could go to a common EU force, while the other 4% support national armies. We actually made a whole video about how this could work in the video linked above if you are interested. This is what I think. Right now, it feels like our leaders are just trying to sit Trump out, hoping that by 2028, a good guy will be back in the White House. That's naive, and honestly, a bit insulting. Anything could happen. Trump could return for a third term, or JD Vance could be the president, or someone else even more extreme. We need to stop trying to impress Washington and finally start building something that moves Europe forward. What we need is a real European deterrent, one that doesn't rely on a single partner, but gladly works with them when it is in our European interest. So please, Rutte, and European leaders, a bit more backbone to Trump and a bit more vision for Europe. Thank you so much for watching. And if you want to dig deeper into media bias, check out our amazing sponsor, Ground News. They make it easy to compare coverage across the political spectrum. And one of their most useful features is their blind spot feed. It highlights stories that one side of the political spectrum isn't covering, helping you step outside of your media bubble and see what others are seeing. You can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. And a huge thank you to our presidents, Jan, Schauke, Christian, Peter, HGVD, Unite Europe, Stefan, and Mr. Probot. Your support makes this channel possible.